Welcome to the haunting room, where fear and mystery await. Turn off the lights, grab your courage, and prepare yourself for stories that will leave you trembling. Enter if you dare. What you hear next might just haunt you forever. Now, let's dive into today's terrifying tales. Last winter, I agreed to house sit for my aunt while she was away on a week-long vacation. Her place was a charming, cozy cottage just outside of town, surrounded by woods that stretched for miles. It sounded relaxing, and I could use the break. I'd spend a few quiet days curled up with a book by her fireplace. The first couple of days were peaceful. The only sounds were the crackling fire, the rustling trees, and the occasional creak of the old house settling. On the third night, though, things changed. It was past midnight, and I was curled up on the couch, half asleep with a book in my lap, when I heard it. A faint sound outside, like a soft, rhythmic tapping. I figured it was the wind knocking branches against the house, but when I got up to check, there was no sign of anything outside. The woods were dark, silent, and still. I shrugged it off, went back inside, and locked the door. As I walked back to the living room, I heard it again. 3 soft taps, this time at the kitchen window. It felt deliberate, like someone was testing. My heart raced as I crept over to the kitchen and peered through the window. Nothing. Just the dark outline of the trees, shadows cast from the moonlight. I told myself I was being paranoid and went to bed, locking my bedroom door behind me, just in case. I had just drifted off to sleep when a loud knock jolted me awake. The sound was coming from inside the house. I sat up in bed, trying to steady my breathing. The knock came again, this time from the hallway, right outside my door. My blood turned cold as I listened, frozen, as a soft scratching sound followed. It was like nails dragging across the wooden door, slow and deliberate. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling someone, but who would believe me? The scratching grew louder, like someone was clawing at the door, trying to get in. I held my breath, praying it would stop. After a few agonizing minutes, the scratching ceased. I stayed there, huddled under the covers, too terrified to move. Then I heard it, a soft, muffled voice on the other side of the door. "I know you're in there." My heart nearly stopped. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but I could make out every word. "Open the door." I clamped my hand over my mouth, desperately trying to stay silent. The handle jiggled and the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Let me in. I just want to talk." I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay silent. Whoever it was, they started knocking again, harder this time. The door rattled on its hinges, and I was sure it would break any second. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The knocking, the rattling, the voice, gone, just like that. I sat there, too terrified to move, listening to the silence. Minutes passed, but I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I worked up the courage to tiptoe to the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. I slowly turned the handle and opened the door just a crack, peeking into the dark hallway. It was empty. My body was tense, every nerve on high alert, but I forced myself to step out and check the house. I walked through each room, my heart pounding, but found no one. I was about to return to my room when I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. On the floor, just outside my bedroom door, was a single, muddy footprint. It was larger than mine, too large for any shoes I owned, and it was fresh. The night it happened, I was already on edge. I'd been living alone for a few months after moving into a small house on the edge of town. It was cozy enough, but my work schedule was intense, and I often found myself spending long, late nights there by myself. It was November, and a cold front had settled over the area, making the house feel darker and more isolated than ever. I was tucked up on the couch with my laptop, half working, half watching some random show, when I heard something strange. At first, it was just a faint, far-off sound, like a creak or a shuffle, but it seemed to come from just outside my living room window. I glanced over, half expecting to see nothing, but then I saw a shadow, a figure, moving slowly along the side of the house, just out of the range of the porch light. My stomach twisted, and I went absolutely still, hoping the person wouldn't notice me. Whoever it was, they crept closer to the window, but the blinds were down just enough to keep me hidden. My heart started pounding as I saw their hand press against the glass, almost like they were testing it, or just waiting. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay quiet, hoping that maybe if I stayed still, they'd think I wasn't home and leave. But then I heard it, the sound of the doorknob rattling, slow and deliberate, as if they were testing to see if it would open. I'd locked it, but my stomach dropped. This person wasn't just here by accident. My phone was on the couch beside me and I grabbed it, fingers shaking as I dialed 911. The operator picked up quickly and I whispered as quietly as I could, explaining that there was someone trying to get into my house. "Stay calm," the operator said. "Lock yourself in a room if you can and stay on the line." I nodded, inching away from the living room, keeping my footsteps as light as possible. Just as I reached the hallway leading to my bedroom, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of a window sliding open. I had locked everything, hadn't I? The thought barely registered before I heard someone climbing through, their footsteps heavy as they stepped onto the floor of my living room. I stifled a gasp and ducked into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I crouched in the corner, the phone still pressed to my ear, the operator asking me to describe everything I could hear. But my voice was shaking so badly that all I could get out was a strangled whisper. The footsteps were moving slowly, almost lazily, as if the intruder knew they had all the time in the world. The sound of cabinets opening and closing echoed down the hall, like they were searching for something. Then, the footsteps stopped. My heart hammered in my chest, and I strained to hear where they'd gone. And that's when I realized they were right outside my bedroom door. The handle jiggled, slowly at first, then harder as the person tried to open it. I pressed myself against the wall, desperate to make myself invisible, praying that the door would hold. But then a voice spoke, low and eerie. "I know you're in there." I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. The voice was calm, almost playful. They weren't here for anything ordinary. They were here for me. The operator's voice was a low hum in my ear, reminding me to stay calm, telling me that officers were on their way, but it felt like they were a million miles away. The door handle stopped rattling, and the silence in the room was so thick that it felt like a weight pressing down on me. Then came a series of loud, sudden bangs as if they were throwing their entire weight against the door. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. "Please, hurry," I whispered into the phone, clutching it so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The banging stopped, and for a second, everything was completely silent. Then, something even worse happened. I heard the faintest scratching sound, like nails or a knife, scraping down the door. The person outside was dragging something sharp along the wood, slow and methodical. "You can't hide forever," the voice said, that horrible calm tone sending chills down my spine. "I'll find you." I felt tears prick my eyes as I squeezed my phone, desperately hoping that help would come in time. The scratching stopped and I braced myself, expecting another assault on the door. But then I heard footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited, listening, hardly daring to breathe. I couldn't hear anything else, and for a moment, I thought maybe they'd given up and left. But as I dared to move, there was a loud bang, coming from the back door. A fresh wave of terror gripped me as I realized what was happening. They were trying to get into the house again, through a different way, maybe hoping to catch me off guard. I stood there, frozen, as the sound of splintering wood echoed through the house. They'd broken down the back door. I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking, telling the operator what was happening, praying that the police would get here in time. Then I heard their footsteps again, slow and deliberate, moving through the kitchen and back toward the hallway where I was hiding. They were coming back for me. I backed away from the door, searching the room for anything I could use to protect myself. My eyes landed on a heavy lamp on the nightstand. I grabbed it, holding it tightly in my hands, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might explode. The footsteps stopped again, right outside my door. There was a pause, then 3 slow, deliberate knocks. "Let me in." My hands shook as I held the lamp, bracing myself for whatever would come through that door. I could hear my own ragged breathing, feel the cold sweat running down my spine. The handle turned, and the door creaked as it opened just a crack. And then, red and blue lights flashed outside the window. The sirens blared as police cars pulled up to the house, their lights flooding the front yard. The door slammed shut, and I heard the intruder's footsteps racing down the hall, out the broken back door, and disappearing into the woods. The officers burst through the front door moments later, guns drawn, searching the house. They found me in my bedroom, still clutching the lamp, shaking so badly I could barely speak. They never found the person who broke in that night. I had always loved my little house. It was an old Victorian-style place with creaky floors, high ceilings, and lots of character. I'd been renting it for a few months, and aside from the occasional odd sound, it had been perfect. But that changed one night in November. It was a Friday, and I was home alone. My friends had invited me out, but I was exhausted from a long work week, so I decided to stay in, make some popcorn, and binge a few shows. The neighborhood was always quiet, and with the streetlights filtering through the bare November trees, everything felt still, cozy even. About halfway through my second episode, I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming from somewhere in the house. Not the front door, but further back. I paused the show, listening closely. Maybe it was a neighbor or someone passing by, but when I got up to check, no one was there. I laughed it off as the house settling. Old places make all kinds of noises, right? A few minutes later, I heard the knocking again. 3 knocks, closer this time. I stood in the hallway trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the sound seemed to echo all around me. My skin prickled. I told myself it was just my nerves and went back to the couch. But then I felt it, the unmistakable feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over at the windows. I could see my reflection in the glass, but beyond that, just the shadows of the yard. Still, that eerie feeling wouldn't go away. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the air felt thicker somehow, heavy. And every time I tried to focus on the TV, I'd catch something moving out of the corner of my eye. Another 3 knocks, this time louder and coming from my bedroom. My stomach dropped. I took a deep breath, trying to summon some courage, and tiptoed down the hall. The door to my room was closed, which was strange because I was sure I'd left it open. "Hello?" I called, barely above a whisper, hoping for some rational explanation, like a draft or a neighbor. Silence. I hesitated, then pushed open the door. Nothing. Just my bed, my dresser, everything exactly as I'd left it. Feeling silly, I started to back out, but then I saw something on my bed. There was a note, folded neatly in the middle of my pillow. I was sure it hadn't been there before. With shaky hands, I picked it up and unfolded it. The words were scrawled in messy handwriting, almost like they'd been scratched onto the paper. "Don't turn around." I froze, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to get out, to leave the house immediately, but curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't resist. I had to turn around. I slowly pivoted, heart pounding, expecting to see, well, I didn't know what. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, just as I'd left it. I forced a laugh, trying to steady my nerves. "Get it together," I muttered. But as I went back to the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights made me jump. And then I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound coming from the hallway. My blood went cold. I sat perfectly still, listening as the sound grew louder. It wasn't footsteps, exactly, more like someone dragging themselves along the floor, inch by inch. My heart hammered as the shuffling stopped just outside the living room door. I held my breath, staring, waiting for something to happen. But there was only silence. I told myself to get up, to check it out, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. After a few minutes, I gathered enough courage to stand up. I grabbed my phone and walked slowly toward the door. I reached out, turned the handle, and opened it a crack. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath and laughed a little, feeling stupid for letting my imagination run wild. But just as I was about to close the door, I noticed something on the floor. A trail of wet, muddy footprints leading from the front door down the hall and stopping right outside the living room. The thing is, I hadn't been outside all night, and the mud, it looked fresh. As I stared at the footprints, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, my pulse racing, and that's when I saw it, in the reflection of the living room window. A figure stood in the shadows behind me, tall and thin, with hollow, dark eyes staring right at me. Thank you for joining us in the Haunting Room for another collection of spine-chilling tales. If you enjoyed the stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next terrifying episode. The darkness is always closer than it seems, and we'll be here waiting. Until next time, stay haunted or not.